Former roommate exploded over my coffee mug, texting me and my husband in a bizarre mix-up that spiraled out of control. 10 or 11 months ago, my fiancé received a message from an old friend, Doug, a total blast from the past, announcing he was moving into town and asking if he could crash for a bit while he looked for a place. At first, it seemed harmless, maybe even fun to relive some memories with an old buddy. But what was supposed to be a brief stay turned into a never-ending ordeal. Doug, wildly overstay, is welcome. He's the type who's fun for lunch or a drink, but painfully oblivious to the art of sharing a space, moving our stuff around without warning, breaking or damaging things, using things and then replacing them, only to take the replacements with him when he finally left. The list of offenses just grew and grew. Eventually, my patience snapped. We gave Doug a deadline and quite literally delivered a move-out solution on a silver platter. One of my coworkers needed a housemate while he prepped to move back to his home state, so we set Doug up with this Rob. Once Rob leaves, Doug can either have the house to himself or find a new roommate, and that transition happened months ago. My husband and I still haven't found a bunch of things lost from our kitchen, but the peace of having our house back is worth it. Most of our wth.reddit frustrations have faded. Or so I thought, until today. Last night, I stopped by Rob's place to pick up some bourbon he'd bought for us. We stood in his kitchen chatting, when suddenly my eyes locked onto something unexpected: a Starbucks "You Are Here" mug from my home state, Wisconsin, sitting calmly on the counter. If you don't collect them, these mugs feature unique city or state designs that can be bought only in that particular place. I've been collecting them for a while, but I hadn't seen my Wisconsin mug for quite some time. I figured my husband probably had it forgotten in his car or work, since he's always drinking coffee and leaving mugs everywhere. Habit made me flip the mug over. He marks his with his initials in Sharpie when he snags one for the road. Sure enough, faint but unmistakable, there was the washed out Sharpie. I laughed and said to Rob, "Tell Doug I'm reclaiming my mug, I've been missing this one," and I took it with me before heading out. This morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Doug: "Give the cup back to Rob so he could return it to Doug, who claimed to have received it as a gift." I texted back, "I snagged it because it had Sharpie on the bottom where husband tried to label it and claim it as his. Are you sure you got the right mug?" I'd never seen Doug with a Starbucks mug, but since he had lived in Wisconsin too, maybe he had one and we swapped them by accident. I brushed it off. But then Doug fired back, "It did not. I got that from my friend in the last time I was back." He went on and on about where he got it, who gave it to him, and then tossed in, "And I really wish you would ask before you just take my things." The irony nearly made my head explode, but I held my tongue. I texted back, not trying to be difficult, but my Y cup was missing. When I looked at the bottom of that one, I thought it had just migrated in the move. I didn't think twice about it. Things went downhill fast. He started text shouting, swearing, and insisting it was his, that it never left his possession since his last trip to Wisconsin, and accusing me of not even having a Y mug in my house. He said his friend would just send another, and then ranted about how he didn't know why he even had to defend himself. 10 or 11 aggressive messages bombarded my phone. I only replied twice. I sent one last message: "I'm not asking you to defend anything. If you got the mug after you moved, I believe you." When I picked it up last night, I honestly went, "Oh shit, here it is." Doug's reply draped with passive aggressiveness: "Whatever, it's okay, I know I had it since friend gave it to me and I brought it back. You can just thank her. Keep it, and several well if it means so much to you" variations. I stopped responding. Frankly, his reaction was getting creepy. Later, I talked to my husband who's out of town, and apparently, Doug had been bombarding him with texts simultaneously, grilling him about whether he marks up his mugs with Sharpie. My husband, confused, admitted he does, and Doug erupted on him, too. I really do think the mug is mine. But if Doug has the same one and truly thinks it's his, I wouldn't begrudge him. It's just a coffee cup. If it's a genuine mix-up, I can't always grab another the next time I visit family. It was probably an innocent mistake. But the way Doug lost his mind over something so silly left me shaken. Even Rob said Doug was so angry that he left for work early to avoid him. I can't stand it when people are angry. My instinct is always to fix things. I feel like I should try to patch things up, but I also feel like I was blindsided and unfairly attacked over something that couldn't have been more innocent. Even if, completely by chance, Doug's mug was the one that happened to be marked, and I'm in the wrong, I never would have deliberately stolen the mug or done it to be mean. The whole situation still has my head spinning. Update 1. Karma, it seems, really is a bitch. Doug somehow got it into his head that he'd ruin my reputation by telling everyone we know what a terrible person I am for stealing his coffee cup. Keep in mind, these people are all friends I've made over the years, most of whom Doug only met through me and my husband. Was he trying to make me look bad? Hoping to hurt my feelings? Honestly, who knows? Ultimately, all he succeeded in doing was alienating himself from everyone and confirming, once and for all, that I really shouldn't feel bad about any of it. After all that nonsense, Rob, Doug's current landlord, roommate, and our mutual friend finally reached his limit. Rob sat Doug down and asked him to move out. The constant anger had just become too much for everyone involved, and the coffee cup fiasco was really only the tip of the iceberg. Rob gave Doug 30 days notice, but Doug's pride wouldn't allow him to stay that long. He announced he was moving back in with his parents anyway, and said he'd be out by June 1st. Saturday rolls around. I get out of the shower to the side of Doug's SUV tearing out of the yard with his trailer in tow. On the plus side, the eyesore of an abandoned trailer was finally gone. But, of course, Doug managed to leave one last parting gift. He completely tore up the lawn as he left and didn't even bother to mow the jungle of grass that had grown where the trailer was parked, even though the mower was literally 3 feet away. My husband just shook his head and said this was exactly what he expected. Doug's selfishness confirmed for the last time. Good riddance. The next day, Sunday, my husband is wrangling our nephews for a day of off-roading and chewing out the ranch. Suddenly, his phone rings. It's Doug. His SUV is broken down. He needs a ride home. My husband, already running late, says sorry, he's busy getting the kids out the door. Doug doesn't skip a beat. Oh, so you're home now, good. I'm right on your way. My husband stares incredulously at me, his face saying, he's kidding, right? Technically, Doug did break down right along our route, but to take him back to Rob's place would have turned a simple trip into a 45-minute roundabout detour. Besides, I remind my husband, Doug has roadside assistance because I set up that OnStar-like device for him myself. So my husband tells Doug to try his roadside service or to call someone else. Doug begins a round of phone calls to Rob, who is out enjoying his own weekend and wants to keep it that way, and to every mutual friend he can think of. Nobody's biting. All of them tell him to just call roadside. Doug tries to feed each person a different excuse. It'll take too long, they don't cover towing, he doesn't trust the tow companies, and so on. Eventually, realizing he has no other option, he calls roadside anyway. They tow his SUV the 10 free miles, included in his coverage. Then the driver takes Doug the extra 4 miles back to Rob's and drops him off. Crisis averted, though clearly not in the way Doug had hoped. But Doug isn't done. He calls my husband a few more times, asking for help diagnosing or fixing the SUV, or maybe loading it onto one of our trailers, or even borrowing it for the 1,200-mile trip back to his parents. My husband, fed up, tells Doug that he has no interest whatsoever in bending over backwards to assist someone who never reciprocates but somehow found the nerve to treat me the way he did. Doug shoots back that he didn't appreciate valuable things like a coffee mug being stolen from him. My husband, never missing a beat, replies, "You're right. We'll be here when you drop off the things of ours that have gone missing from the kitchen. Also, I'll have the rundown for the unpaid rent and utilities you still owe us ready. I'm sure you want to settle up. After all, it's the fair thing to do." And just like that, radio silence from Doug. According to Rob, Doug's been sulking ever since. I can't say I'm surprised. Update. 2. Tuesday afternoon, I get a voicemail from a deputy asking me to return his call about a reported theft of property. I blinked at my phone, hit redial, and, I swear to you, the first words out of my mouth were, "Is this about a coffee mug?" He laughed. "Ma'am, I'm not supposed to editorialize, but yes." I gave him the condensed version, told him the mug I grabbed had my husband's faded Sharpie on the bottom, offered to send a picture. He said he was already in our area and might as well stop by to put the whole thing to bed. So I made coffee like the most compliant criminal in the world and waited. The deputy shows up, looks like every cop who's had to spend their shift breaking up HOA disputes, and flips the mug over. He didn't even try to hide the eye roll when he saw the ghost of my husband's initials circling the phone. "I'm going to call this a civil misunderstanding," he said, "and recommend you both take it to small claims if you want your day in court." He called Doug while he was standing in my kitchen. I only heard our side. "No, sir, there's no admission of theft here." "Yes, it is writing on it." "No, I'm not taking a mug into evidence." And then he hung up, apologized for the inconvenience, and told me to have a good day. I have never felt so vindicated by a piece of porcelain. An hour later, I get an Instagram DM from a woman in Wisconsin whose name I vaguely recognized from a wedding guest list years ago. "Hey, this is Kendra. I think we met once. Doug brought me up to you guys out of the blue and it made me uncomfortable." She went on to say Doug had messaged her asking her to back him up on the mug story, specifically that she gave him a Wisconsin mug the last time he was back. She sent screenshots. His actual message to her: if you could just tell my husband you got me that why mug, it would get everyone off my case. Her reply was a simple, I didn't. Also please don't involve me. She ended by telling me she did, in fact, mail him a brand new Wisconsin mug last week just to get him to stop texting her about it. The tracking number showed it was delivered Monday. Translation: his "my friend will just send another" line was never about a beloved heirloom, it was him actively trying to manufacture an alibi mid-tantrum. While I was processing that, Rob texted, "You might want to swing by." He'd been mowing, bless him, and found a Rubbermaid tote pushed into the back corner of the shed behind the gas cans. The lid was half split and the whole thing smelled like old grass clippings and spilled two-stroke. Inside was a museum of our missing domestic life. My microplane grater. The little silicate head and spatulas we thought got thrown out, with the Christmas cookie carnage. My favorite tongs with the heat scars. A stack of Pyrex lids that had been making me crazy because none of them matched anything anymore. My husband's Yeti tumbler with the dent he got when our nephew used it as a drum. I actually said, "You've got to be kidding me," out loud to no one in particular. At the bottom, under a ratty grocery bag, were 3 flattened Starbucks "You Are Here" boxes with my collection penciled across the front and dates that were, hilariously, smack in the middle of the time Doug was staying with us. One of them said Wisconsin. The other 2 were Chicago and Minnesota, both out of which I'd assumed got lost to the black hole that is a communal dishwasher. I've never been so delighted to be wrong. We loaded the tote into my trunk, and I didn't text Doug. My husband came home that night and we sat at the table going through everything, scratching off items on a mental list we both stopped saying out loud. Then he pulled out the spreadsheet he'd started months ago: rent split by days, utilities down to the kilowatt, the cleaning fee we ate when we had to have the carpets restretched because of a toppled plant. He's a numbers guy, so it was neat, fair, boring on purpose. We printed it, attached photos of the found items and the mug with his initials, and sent Doug a copy by email and certified mail with a note: once we have our things back and the balance settled, we will consider the matter closed. 2 days of silence and then a new number popped up on my phone. "This is Doug's father," a tired voice said. I braced for round 2. Instead he asked, very simply, for the total, and whether he could meet to return anything that doesn't belong to my son. We picked a diner at noon. He showed up early with a banker's box and a check already filled out. He was polite in that old school, mortified on behalf of his adult child way I haven't seen since my high school principal called my mom about a skipped class. He slid the box to me like we were doing a hostage exchange. Inside was the rest of the missing coffee paraphernalia and yes, the Chicago and Minnesota mugs. The Chicago handle had the tiny chip on the inside edge from the time I banged it into the sink, and there was a coffee ring baked into the bottom that no amount of barkeeper's friend will ever budge. He apologized for the lawn. He apologized for me having to talk to a deputy about a mug. He did not make excuses. He did not say boys will be boys. He said they were addressing some issues and he appreciated us not making his wife cry by serving their son at the house. He asked if the check covered it. It did. I gave him the certified receipt anyway and told him, honestly, that I hoped they got some peace. He looked at the ceiling for a long second, nodded, and left. Because the universe has a sense of humor, when I got home there was a package on our porch addressed to Doug, forwarded from Rob's, a brand new Wisconsin mug in a crisp box with a little note tucked inside: "Maybe this will help. Please stop testing me about cups." Okay. I took a picture for my husband and walked it over to Rob. He laughed so hard he had to sit on the steps. We both decided it could live at his place, on a high shelf, far away from man who can't share. That night my husband made a big show of pouring his coffee into the Chicago mug and raising it like a toast. I went with an ugly diner mug from a gas station in Amarillo because I felt superstitious about inviting any more chaos from ceramic. Doug sent one last text to my husband around midnight that said, "Glad your wife feels good about stealing," and then 3 dots and nothing else. We didn't respond. Rob says the spare key is changed, the tote-shaped hole in the shed is empty, and the lawn finally looks like someone loves it again. Update 3. I thought the chapter break was the dad with the banker's box and a diner check. Apparently not. Monday morning, there's a thick envelope in our mailbox with magistrate court in block letters across the top. Inside, a notice to appear. Doug had filed a small claims suit for wrongful conversion of unique memorabilia, demanded value $500, with a handwritten add-on that said plus court costs and stress. I read it twice because somewhere in the middle my brain refused to translate. My husband looked at me over his cereal like, "Are we being punked by pottery?" We showed up on our date wearing the most boring clothes we own and carrying the same folder we'd already given his father, plus fresh printouts of the deputy's incident number and the screenshot from Kendra with her "please stop texting me about cups" note. The courtroom was running behind, because the docket was a parade of landlords and someone arguing about a canoe. When they called our case, Doug marched up with a shoe box under his arm like he was presenting the Ark of the Covenant. He put the box on the evidence table and peeled the lid off with this whole flourish, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek not to laugh because inside was a brand new Wisconsin mug still wrapped in tissue with a little cardboard spacer wedged in the handle. The judge, a woman who looked like she'd seen every petty human behavior 8,000 times, peered over her glasses and said, "Is that the item in question?" Doug said yes. She asked when he acquired it. He said, "I've always had it." She stared at the pristine box. Then she looked at our photo of the underside of our mug with my husband's sad, faded initials and the coffee patina that could tell our life story in rings. She asked if there was any evidence that the mug Doug brought in today was the same one he alleged was taken. He tried to pivot to, "It's the same kind," and she cut in with, "That's not what I asked." He sputtered something about gifts and trips and collections and a story I had already heard so many times I could mouth it along like a bad karaoke track. My husband handed over the deputy's card, the incident number, and the picture of our mug. The judge asked if the deputy could confirm, and because the universe was in a generous mood, the deputy happened to be down the hall on another matter and came in. He took one look at our printed photo, nodded, and told the judge, flat, that when he saw the mug in our kitchen it had writing on it indicating it was theirs, and that he told Doug it was a civil misunderstanding and not criminal. Then he pointed at the tissue of paper confetti in Doug's box and said, That looks like a new purchase." Doug started to raise his voice, and the judge held up one finger. She said, very calmly, that small claims is for money and property, not feelings, that he could not claim damages on an item he could not prove was his, that presenting replacement goods as evidence of original ownership is not persuasive, and that if he wanted to litigate stress, he needed a different court and a different theory. Then she asked if everyone was aware that our side had already been paid for missing rent and damage by a third party. We submitted the receipt and copy of the check. Doug's mouth actually hung open. "You took my money?" he said, like the room had tilted. The judge clarified that it was his father's check and that it had satisfied a separate ledger. She dismissed the case with a little bang of her pen on the pad and ordered him to pay our filing fee for the day. It wasn't much, but it felt like a ceremonial peppermint after a spicy meal. We walked out into the hallway and who should be on the bench but Doug's father, hat in his hands, looking like a man waiting outside a principal's office in 1953. He stood when he saw us, apologized again without prompting, and told us quietly that they had asked Doug to come home to reset. He didn't go into the nature of the reset and I didn't ask. He did ask, very pointedly, if there had been any more contact. We both said no. It was true for the hour we stood there. That night, my husband and I were halfway through a terrible crime documentary when both our phones dinged with the same alert, "Unknown AirTag moving with you." I stared at the screen, felt my stomach drop, and then did that robotic thing where you follow the little dot like it's a treasure map even though the treasure is a problem. The Find My app led us to the garage, then back to the car, then right to the passenger seat where the slider of the seat rail meets the carpet. There, taped down with the kind of gray duct tape people use to fix a bumper, was a white disc with a Sharpie smiley face drawn on it. My husband pried it up with a flathead and my hands were shaking hard enough to make the AirTag chirp sound mean. He held it up. On his screen, the serial number blinked. He tapped through. The owner phone number popped up, the last 4 digits as familiar as a song I hate. We didn't text or grandstand. We drove the 2 miles to the substation with the world's most cursed scavenger hunt prize and told the same deputy at the window that we weren't actually trying to collect their frequent flyer coffee club punch card. He took our statement, scanned the serial, and nodded at the registered owner info like, "Yep." He asked if we wanted to file a report for stalking. I said the word felt too big in my mouth and he said it was the correct one for devices used to track people without consent, even if the motivation is just petty control. We filed. He pinged the number on record. The call went to voicemail. 10 minutes later, Doug's father called the station back. 30 minutes after that, he was at the desk, picking up an AirTag in a Ziploc bag with a look that made my heart twist in a way I wasn't expecting. He turned to me and said, "Thank you for bringing it here and not to my wife." We changed the garage code and the Wi-Fi password out of pure superstition, and my husband deadbolted the back door in this methodical, quiet way he has when his temper is too hot to trust his mouth. He set the Chicago mud on the counter upside down so the chip faces the wall, like it was shame facing time out. I made tea because it felt disloyal to the entire coffee industrial complex to involve it again. We sat at our own kitchen table, in our own house, with no one moving the salt to a new place for no reason, and listened to the cicadas bash themselves against the screens. At midnight, my husband's phone buzzed and lit with a Venmo request from Doug for $100 labeled emotional damages. He declined it without comment and blocked the new number. In the morning, there was a last voicemail from a different number that was just breathing and then, so faint I almost missed it. Glad your wife feels good about stealing, and then a click. We sent it to the deputy, forwarded it to his father, and went to work like people who are stubbornly, aggressively normal. Rob texted a picture around lunch. He'd put the brand new Wisconsin mug from Kendra on a high shelf where the only thing it can collect is dust. He'd written a piece of masking tape under it that said, Exhibit A, because he is a petty king. He said the lawn he's nourished back from the tire tracks is finally taken, the green smoothing out almost all the way to the fence. I stood out there after dinner with my bare feet in the cool grass, the cicadas back at it, and for the first time in months it felt like the ground wasn't going to lurch under me. I don't know what chapter this is for, Doug. I hope it's the one where someone smarter than me sends the right words and he hears them. For us, it's the one where the mugs go back in the cabinet where they belong, where the only thing tracking us is a running app on my phone, and where the next time my husband leaves a cup in his truck for a month and swears it's seasoned, I will fish it out and wash it with something approaching gratitude. Update 4. I thought the AirTag in our passenger seat was the part where the credits roll. Sunday night proved me wrong. At 11:58 at p.m. someone banged on the front door hard enough to shake the glass. I went straight to ice vein because knocks at midnight mean hospital, fire, or stupid. My husband checked the peephole and then did the exact, visible unclench you do when the monster under the bed turns out to be your laundry. Deputy Coffee Mug stood on our porch, hat in his hand like a man about to tell you your cab got out. He apologized before he even said hello. We got a welfare check call, he said. Caller reported yelling and domestic disturbance at this address. We were in pajamas with bowls of popcorn like two commercials for Quiet Lives. He asked if he could step in and just lay eyes. He did the world's most respectful glance around, peered into our very boring living room with a throw blanket that never matches anything, nodded at the cicadas throwing themselves at the screen door like blind pilots, and said he'd mark it unfounded. We're getting a lot of hang-up calls tonight, he added, eyes doing the cop thing where the sentence means more than the words. He wouldn't say who called policy, but the look said, you and I both know. It took exactly 9 minutes after he left for our garage camera to ping. A shape crossed the far edge of the driveway, too tall and too stiff to be a raccoon, then backed out of frame like a guilty conscience in a bad play. The ring caught just enough for you to tell, not Doug. His father. He didn't come to the door, he slid something under the mat and walked away fast, shoulders up by his ears. When it felt safe to move like a human again, we opened the door. The thing under the mat was a plain white envelope with our last name spelled right and the stamp from their little post office 3 towns over. Inside, a typed 1-sentence letter that said, we have asked him to give us his phone. Below it, handwritten in that tidy, teachery script you get when you grew up balancing checkbooks at a kitchen table, if you get calls again tonight, it is not him. Please call me. He had underlined, not twice like he was trying to pull it across a finish line. Monday morning, I took the deputy a box of donuts because at this point it feels like we share custody of the problem. He told me he'd flagged the welfare call as misuse and attached it to our stalking report. He said the number pinged back to a VoIP account with a throwaway email, and then he shrugged because everybody has a cousin who can make a new email address in 2 minutes flat. He printed the TPO paperwork for us anyway and told us, in that flat neutral public servant tone, that if we wanted the line drawn by a judge instead of a handshake we should draw it now. We filed. The X-Part got granted by lunchtime because someone taped a tracker under your car seat apparently gets you a fast pass. Service went out to the parent's address because that's where he's supposed to be, and by supper I had an email notification from the court that it had been served. 10 minutes later my phone buzzed with a number I didn't know. It was his father. He's very angry, he said quietly, like someone trying not to startle a bird. But you did the right thing. The hearing was set for Friday. We showed up in the same boring clothes we wore for small claims and sat back down in the same waiting room with the same sad ficus and the same parade of disputes streaming past like an argument theme park. When they called our names, the judge from Mud Court took the bench again, glasses low on her nose like nothing surprised her anymore and she dared you to try. Doug came in late, out of breath, with a folder full of papers clutched like a prop. He did not have a lawyer and he did not have his phone. His father actually sat 3 rows back holding something that looked suspiciously like a tiny lockbox on his knees. The judge asked if either of us wanted to make a statement. I told the story in 10 sentences, because I've learned brevity looks like sanity, and handed over copies, the AirTag serial record with his number, the midnight voicemail that was just breathing and a curse, the welfare check incident number, a screenshot of the Venmo emotional damages request because sometimes the jokes write themselves. Doug's turn. He said he put the AirTag in our car to get back the mug, and then, I swear to you, looked directly at the judge like she was going to snap her fingers and say, "Of course, carry on with your treasure hunt, sir." She blinked. He tried to pivot too. "It wasn't about them, it was about my property," which is a bold legal argument when your property is allegedly a cup and your tracking device is taped under somebody else's seat. The judge did not blink again. She asked if he understood what a protective order was. He said he wasn't a criminal. She said that wasn't a question. She granted the 12-month no contact like she was handing out a parking voucher, crisp and done. No calls. No third-party messages. No creeping around the edges. She told him if he needed to retrieve any belongings he could do it through a counsel or a law enforcement escort. She looked past him at his father and said, "Sir, thank you for your cooperation," in a way that made me picture every gray hair on that man's head marching up there to salute. I walked out of a courtroom and breathed air that felt like it hadn't been in somebody else's lungs first. We both tried to go back to work like normal humans, but by late afternoon my hands were buzzing like I'd had 5 coffees on an empty stomach. I shut the laptop and made my husband do the only thing that reliably resets my brain, drive out to the junk store by the highway where somebody's floor model sofa from 1998 sat 6 inches from a box of National Geographics and a bin of mismatched forks. We were shoulder deep in a milk crate of postcards when I saw it. On the crusty wire rack behind the register, next to a chip souvenir bell from Branson and a beer koozie advertising a feed store, was a Starbucks Been There Wisconsin mug for 99 cents with a piece of masking tape that said Wisconsin cows $1. I laughed out loud and then caught it in my hand like it was a sneeze. I don't believe in omens, but if I did, that felt like one of those cartoons where the anvil stops 3 inches above Wile E. Coyote's head and floats back up to the cloud it fell from. I left it on the rack, because something in me needed to prove I could. On impulse at the counter, I bought instead a mug so ugly it looked like it had been dipped in gravel. It said World Okayest Golfer even though neither of us has held a club. The cashier, a woman with the kind of bangs you only get from cutting them yourself over a sink, said, "That one's haunted." I told her that made 2 of us and added a $5 donation to the Humane Society jar for good measure. On the way home, my husband's phone lit up with a call from the deputy. "Just a heads up," he said. "There's going to be a citation in the mail for unlawful use of an electronic tracking device. Misdemeanor. Nothing you need to worry about other than a docket number if it comes up again." The deputy did that thing where you can't hear him get out of the chair and lean on the counter through the phone. "Also," he said, a little softer, "thanks for staying boring." It landed like a compliment. We promised to keep it up. Wednesday morning, there was a banker's box on our porch again. Same stamps. Same dad. No ring alert of a tall man doing a guilt creep this time. He must have come at dawn and moved like a fog. Inside, 2 hoodies my husband forgot he even owned and a bundle of cables tied with twine like somebody's grandfather wrapped them. On top was a Ziploc with a key we didn't recognize and a sticky note that said, "We found this in his glove box." The key had one of those little magnet boxes snapped around at the undercarriage kind you use when your teenager locks himself out too often. I held it up and looked at my husband. He didn't say anything out loud. We put it with the AirTag in the file at the station like we were cataloging items in an exhibit titled The Bad Ideas Tour. Because cosmic timing has a favorite sport and it is irony, that night Rob called to invite us to his porch for burgers. When we got there, he waved us over like you call a dog to see a squirrel. He had set the pristine Wisconsin Mud Kender's peace offering on the top of his old hutch like a trophy. He taped a new label under it with a date and exhibit retired. His cat, who is appropriately named Mayhem and has the gravity of a bowling ball on a glass shelf, chose that exact moment to launch herself up the back of a chair and tail whip the hutch. The mug wobbled once, twice, and then took a swan dive to the rug we all suddenly loved more than family. It hit, bounced, and didn't break. I actually applauded like an idiot. Rob declared it released from evidence and demoted it to a pencil cup. Mayhem blinked and sat down with the smugness of a god who chose mercy. I wish I could say that was the last peep. It almost was. 2 nights later, my husband's Venmo lit up with a username that was a string of numbers and the word coffee law. The request was for $50 labeled court fee reimbursement. We didn't accept it, we didn't decline it, we screenshot it and sent it straight to the deputy and to the email address on file for the court. The next morning there was an automatic notice in my inbox from the clerk that said, "Petitioner has reported attempted contact. This is notice that respondent is advised that any contact, including via financial applications, may be considered a violation." If email could purse its lips, that one did. Thursday afternoon, I opened our junk drawer to look for batteries and found an index card I'd forgotten. I'd scribbled a week Deb left our house, a list of house things I will not compromise on again in my handwriting, loopy from anger. The first one said, "No house guests longer than 7 days unless they share my last name." The second said, mugs go back in the cabinet they came from. The third said, if it feels weird, it is. I stuck it back in the drawer, but I didn't hide it this time. Tonight my husband poured coffee into the world's ugliest golfer mug and passed it to me like a peace pipe. He took the Chicago mug for himself and clanked them together, gentle as a toast at quiet wedding. The cicadas were back to their drumline. Mayhem was probably deciding which shelf to test for integrity, and somewhere 3 towns over a father was probably sleeping with a lockbox on his nightstand. The lawn out back has gone at spring green to summer thick, the tire tracks a memory the grass decided not to keep. We drank our coffee hot, in our kitchen, with our mugs, and it tasted exactly like what I wanted, ordinary.